Hey there folks, welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're finally going to be talking about the newest album from Neck Deep called The Peace and the Panic. So yeah, I know I'm late to talking about this album. I also know that if I wanted to, I probably could have voted to cover this record earlier on my schedule, and I didn't. It got to the top of the schedule organically thanks to regular patron votes, and that's fine. And if any of this sounds like I'm not looking forward to covering this album, I wouldn't quite say that's accurate. It's just more that I've got a swath of albums that attracted a lot more interest from me, and okay, might as well deal with this now. I don't really review a lot of pop punk, as you all probably know at this point. I don't mind the genre fusion, it's definitely catchy, can bring a certain verve and energy to spice up my schedule, but it's not something that I actively seek out in the same way I will indie country or indie rock or black metal or certain strains of hip-hop, and I haven't even covered as much indie country as I want this year. Now, most of this is because while pop punk at its best captures the electricity and firepower of both its component genres, there's a whole lot of material that I just find kind of okay without being truly interesting. And yes, a big part of this is the songwriting, which can feel near permanently adolescent for a lot of bands. But another factor is that when the band does get older or wants to experiment towards power pop or indie rock or emo or just plain punk rock, the sound often tends to get a little bit more diverse and interesting. I have heard a lot of pop punk that I like, don't get me wrong, but a factor is that a lot of the mid-tier bands, they just start to run together for me. When you just have a limited set of power chords, I start hearing a lot of this stuff sounds the same. So what about Neck Deep, a Welsh group that broke out in the 2010s with some reasonably well-received EPs before signing to Hopeless for 2 albums? Well, I'd probably classify them as a prime example of exactly what I'm talking about. A decent enough band that occasionally took some chances in composition, turned some pretty good results, but the writing never really grabbed me beyond some isolated moments of cleverness, and they definitely wore their influences pretty strongly on their sleeves, like Blink-182 and especially A Day to Remember, which kind of makes sense given how the frontman of that group produced their 2015 album. But shortly after that album was released, their founding guitarist Lloyd Roberts left the band on some really ugly allegations, replaced by Sam Bowden, a hardcore guitarist formerly of Blood Youth, and they connected with producer Mike Green, who all you might recognize from All Time Low, Pierce the Veil, and a few of the poppier leaning bands in this genre, which is not a bad thing, and the band took a little bit more time to iron out the kinks for this album, taking 2 years, so this could be pretty worthwhile. So what did I get from The Peace and the Panic? Well, honestly, it's pretty damn solid. It's not exceptional or all that revolutionary in the genre of pop punk, but The Peace and the Panic has enough strong tunes and balanced subject matter to have a strong enough core, and the experiments that it does try mostly stick the landing. In other words, it's the sort of album where I'm honestly thinking I'll struggle to say all that much about it. If you're familiar with the sound of good pop punk, you will know and recognize this. It's not gonna blow your mind, but hey, it passed the time pretty well. It's enjoyable. But okay, since there are some great songs on this album, and there is a noticeable gap between the best and the worst, where could Neck Deep really step it up? Well, if you take a look at the instrumentation, there honestly isn't a tremendous amount of room to change things up, at least on a compositional level. Solid power chords, a rhythm section that can feel a tad overweight on some songs like Motion Sickness, but for the most part complements the melodies really quite well, and frontman Ben Barlow showing off a familiar vocal tone that hits the mark between kind of bratty and genuine earnestness, helped along by his choice to dip into his lower register that I honestly wish he would do a little bit more often. He sounds pretty good there. And if you were worried about Sam Bowden stepping up to lead guitarist, well, don't be. Because when he gets room to really shred, or even just take the melodic lead, he really does deliver. With my personal favorite moment coming along with those little trilling guitar pieces in the background on the richer atmosphere behind 1970 something. Good enough song for me to just completely ignore how the title was cribbed from a Mark Wills song from the 90s. And of course, the band, they have got a knack for a well-timed key change, something that's really gone out of style and should come back in, which takes the slight warp around the noisier groove of Happy Judgment Day into a major key and a killer final chorus. Great song. Now, this inevitably raises the specter of producer interference from Mike Green, but honestly, it's mostly minor. It's mostly with tracks like Critical Mistake reaching bowling for soup levels of over-polish, or the drum machines that are kind of slotted in for the hook on Where Do We Go, When We Go. They were just kind of unnecessary on the hook. They feel a little bit clumsy there. But really, the blend of acoustic and electric tones does play a solid dividend on Wish You Were Here, and the more jangling riffs of 1970 Something and Parachute, they definitely connect for me. Those are some good to great songs. Now all this will take us to the content, and where I actually think Neck Deep probably hit their mark the most consistently, and it has to do with the sense of real maturity. Okay, as much maturity as you can expect in pop punk, but you know what, it actually is here, because in the space between records, multiple members of the band lost their fathers, and yeah, that does carry some weight, and that loss of a stabilizing force places the members of the band in increasingly uncertain positions, only egged on by an increasingly deceptive political system, at which Neck Deep takes effective but rather shallow pot shots. They could afford to go deeper there. The greater story of this album is coming to grips with that instability in their lives between inner peace and real angst and grief. And while the strokes that it paints to tell this story are kind of broad, they're effective. I like how In Bloom has the frank realization that the relationship with his girl isn't gonna work until he can put the time in to really fix his own life on his own. And as much as Critical Mistake goes right up to the line of Offspring level obnoxiousness, it's more exasperated at a relationship where he's overcommitted to someone who doesn't give for him in the same way. And it's an acknowledgement that he needs to hold himself accountable for his part of that. And while Heavy Lies definitely plays a little bit too basic for its own good on that hook, along with the lines like "you're better off with me," which is a little bit clingy and not in a good way, the crux of this record comes with "Wish You Were Here" and 1970 Something. The first, the lonely wish to recapture memories and reconcile real grief, even as he rejects paltry assurances that it was meant to be that this person died or that he's in a better place now. The second song telling that man's life story and showing him step up to comfort his mother and celebrate that father's life, which is all he can be sure of in the end, is celebrating that that's all that matters to him. And yeah, Where Do We Go When We Go, it might hit that point a little bit too obviously. The subtlety in the writing on this project can feel a little bit spotty, I will admit that, but you know what, the heart and underlying maturity to look forward has some real weight for me in the way that a lot of pop punk doesn't really go there, at least without tilting towards overwrought emo, and I can appreciate that. So yeah, I like this project. Straightforward with good hooks, solid performances, diverse without being messy, and a solid thematic core that showcases an act that's got real potential going forward, especially if they tighten up their writing to cut a little deeper. Hell, they can stay in pop punk, they've got a good knack for it. Again, I'm not sure I would put it among the best pop punk records that I've ever heard, as there are a few moments that can feel a little bit like filler, and the lyrical and production choices could have a little bit more room for refinement, but for me, I think it's a light 7 out of 10, definitely a recommendation, especially if this sort of sound is right up your alley. Now for me, acts like Neck Deep, they've got their place, and you know what, Neck Deep is definitely a cut above average, so yeah, give this a look. Solid stuff. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. Like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. I know this has been out for a while, it only just got to the top of my schedule, we'll get to that in a second, but if you want to buy the album, and I recommend you do, it's pretty damn good, links in the description below, and I got the poll down there. I'm curious for more hardcore Neck Deep fans following this, although I imagine so many of you just loved it all to begin with. And yeah, I was going to get to this in more detail, it just took a while to get up that schedule, and it did drop while I was on vacation, so give me a break. Beyond that, if you guys want to take a look at that schedule and help support this channel, link to my Patreon is right over there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on that schedule, and once a week for the higher tier contributors, you get to add albums, movies, or even a top 10 list to that schedule. And really, I do appreciate it for all you guys' contributions, considering I'm still dealing with YouTube demonetization, because apparently my content is too risque. Go figure. But until then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.